Hey, I want to talk to you a moment about reinforcement. Last lecture at had to do with classical conditioning, and that's a simplistic, really a involuntary type of learning. Reinforcement's different. Reinforcement's based on consequences. It's based on how you uh, how you respond and what the response is that you use to manage your behavior. So we're going to talk about theories of reinforcement. Sorry about the kind of flighty introduction. It's had a lot of things going through my mind that has to do with this. Reinforcement is really interesting. This is B.F. Skinner's world, among others. But I want to talk to you about the basics of it. I'm not going to get into Skinner too much. I'm going to talk about, I think his first name is Dave Premack, and the Premack principle, something you may or may not have heard of before. Well, let's dive right into this theoretical stuff. We're going to talk about a couple little theories. Drive reduction theory. Um, I'll mention a name, Hull, but don't worry about that. It's just what I want you to know is the date. A lot of this stuff dates back to the 40s. The drive reduction theory is uh, it's an event that's reinforcing, and it's so strong that it's associated with a reduction in some type of physiological drive. If you are hungry, then you're driven to eat. I'm hungry right now. I'm driven to, but I don't have time. So if food's not available, I have this drive to find food. And we'll be talking about animals a little bit today, particularly rats, because that's such a focus of study. Their behaviors can easily be projected onto humans. So this drive reduction theory talks about things like food. It doesn't have to be food, it be anything. But it's powerful enough to drive you into seeking out whatever it is that's lacking. So let's use food. That's the simplest. And we all get hungry every day. As I said, I'm hungry right now. I could use me maybe a biscuit or three. Um, so I'm hungry. Run out to the dining hall here, and I get a egg biscuit. I don't even know if they have them, and I eat it. And what happens? The drive is reduced. How easy is that? Drive reduction theory. A lack, you satisfy the lack, and then the drive to obtain that goes away. Uh, and you can manipulate this stuff, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So uh, when I have, that's called strengthening. So when I have supplied that need, then I no longer uh, have to have that. I don't have that drive again. Simple enough, right? Well, it gets a little worse than that. Um, we can use personal examples. I won't, but we all have many of these drives in our lives, and we try various ways to satisfy those things. We have to talk about things related to this called primary reinforcers. So, a primary reinforcers are those things that satisfy the uh, physiological need. Hunger is a physiological need. So primary reinforcer takes care of that. But we have these things called secondary reinforcers. They have become reinforcers because there's an association. What does that sound like? Classical conditioning, right? So the stuff kind of runs together in some cases. Now, this doesn't have to be direct, it can be indirect. So a primary reinforcer is a type of drive reduction. A person may enjoy doing something, and because they enjoy that, okay, I usually don't use personal examples that much, but let me give you an example. fly airplanes. I think I've mentioned it before, probably 1,000 times. Um, so the enjoyment is the flying, but I may collect information about flying. So that would be indirect, right? So, but what does it do? Uh, it's associated. I'm reading about maneuvers, or I'm reading about procedures, how to put the airplane in the air, how to get it on the ground safely, etc. And I read all these books about it and what people do wrong, what they do right, and I associate that with flying. So uh, I may associate that with the satisfaction of flying an airplane. That makes sense. You do it with food too. Uh, your textbook uses cookbook collecting. We all like to eat, I hope. Uh, so you collect cookbooks according to your text. I said, well, okay, but I collect cookbooks, but I associate that with eating, which in turn is associated with a reduction in hunger. Hull, the man I mentioned earlier, says that all reinforcers are associated directly or indirectly with some type of drive reduction. Kind of strange, huh? But there's a problem with that. Major problem is that physiological views of reinforcements indicate that some reinforcers don't seem to be associated with drive reduction. Now, I told you we'd talk about rats, and I like to use this simply because your book does, and most textbooks do. They include guinea pigs, rats, etc. Because what did Skinner work with? Rats, right? Rats in a maze. Behaviors discovered from working with rats in a maze. So let's pick on our little buddies. And in the case of this in your text, a rat presses a lever to obtain access to a running wheel. Uh, so why would that be important? Well, the wheel indicates a reinforcement avenue, if you want to call it that. If you want to use a human being, teenagers spending money on music. Sorry, didn't mute my phone. Teenagers spending money on things that they desire, and once they have, uh, sorry, I had to answer that. Um, I apologize. It's real life, right? So they acquire what they want, and then this drive reduction is is taken care of. But there are other motivations. So when you begin to talk about the complexity of behavior, then you have to consider uh, all of the components of what you're dealing with. And that leads us to this discussion of incentive motivation. Incentive motivation is motivation that comes from some part of the reinforcer called proprieties, instead of an internal drive, like an instinctual thing. You play a video game for the fun of it, or you go to a concert, and a lot of this is right out of your text, and I like to do that because you can hear this and then read about it, and it reinforces it. Hey, cool, huh? So, or go buy a fancy car. These are incentive motivations. Let me ask you a question, would you consider acquiring a degree an incentive motivation? I think the answer is probably yes. I don't get up in the morning and have this internal desire. Uh, my stomach is telling me that, you know what, you need to go get a PhD in psychology. That's not the way it happens. It's not this instinctual thing, but it's connected to biology uh, through reinforcement. So there's some that are clearly associated with drive reduction, and there's some that are clearly associated with drive reduction that can be affected by incentive factors. Going to a restaurant is driven by hunger, uh, but I want to go eat Indian food, which is one of the foods that I love. I love the spiciness within reason, Mexican food, I absolutely love Mexican food, etc. German, I like German food. So I look for those kinds of, that's incentive. The drive to eat is not the incentive. That's the biological drive. The incentive is what do I associate with that? So the spiciness plays no role in the hunger, as your textbook points out. It's just a form of sensory stimulation, which obviously is biological, but there's a perception component to that. So, in and of itself, drive reduction doesn't take care of all the explanations of why you do what you do to satisfy a need. And sometimes the need comes in different forms. And that leads us to this fellow I mentioned earlier, Premack, the Premack principle. Honestly, I can't remember Brother Premack's first name. I was thinking it was Dave. Could be wrong, but I'm not going to worry about that. And you shouldn't either. I won't ask you what his first name is. Premack principle, what is it? Well, it deals with this. Uh, you get up every day and you face what? The real world, right? So it's nice to know if something in your day is going to be a reinforcer. Uh, you use something you like as a reinforcer, let's say. I'm getting up this morning and I'm going to go lecture at Carolina University, and believe it or not, I really enjoy that. Kind of miss those long lectures for an hour. I know you don't, but they're kind of interesting. So I use something as a reinforcer, but it's not always. Uh, what if I'm working with you? I don't know what reinforces you. I don't know what your desires and likes and needs are. So I have to use generalities. Um, a little child likes the attention of the mom, right? By the way, just as a sidelight, Sigmund Freud's part of his developmental um, theory dealt in the Oedipus complex. So you can't apply that to this. I thought I'd mention it though because it still floats around sometimes. You can read about the Oedipus complex if you're interested in it. 5-year-old boy, little kid, little girl, uh, likes the attention of his mom, but he doesn't want that attention when he's trying to build himself up in front of his friends. Because that's a little, yeah, we don't do that. Premack principle then speaks to those kind of situations. It's a more objective way of determining if something can be used as a reinforcer. Now, you all know what you like. So the Premack principle talks about reinforcers being viewed as behaviors rather than stimuli. So if I have to, we talked about learning and like pressing a lever to acquire a snack. Remember that from last? Okay, so if if I press a lever and it's reinforced by food, then that act of reinforcement, that act of lever pressing is the reinforcement. And then eating the food, that's the behavior. See if you can make that connection. Uh, and that you can apply this to almost anything. So if we want to break it down, we can break it down into two things: the behavior being reinforced, and then the behavior that is being reinforced, and that's followed by the behavior that is the reinforcer. So you do something and you get a reinforcement from that. Hope that makes sense. So you're going to have to deal with things like probability and frequency when you begin to get involved more in that, and I'll let you do that in your reading because I don't want to take time to do that. Right now, I want to talk more about this Premack deal. Premack principle actually states that there's a high probability, i.e., high frequency, um, states that a high probability behavior can be used to reinforce a low probability behavior. And we can go back to the rat. when a rat's hungry, eating food has a higher likelihood of occurrence than running in a wheel, right? Or pressing a lever or whatever the case is. So eating food is high probability behavior. If the that behavior reinforces running on the wheel, you have to be careful here because you'll get into a different kind of reinforcer. But basically, high probability leads to a lower probability. So running on the wheel is a low probability for the rat, but to get to the wheel, uh, then he satisfies the hunger, then gets to the wheel. Now, in some cases, you would want to have something that's rewarding at the end of wheel running, I guess. But that's what the Premack principle states. I'll give you another example. Uh, if the rat's not hungry, for example, it's not going to the behavior is likely not going to occur. But let me give you one that'll fit you a little bit better. If you are, let's say you need to study. So I think, okay, but I also like playing video games. So here's what I'm going to do. This is a Premack principle put into practical means. I'm going to study for 2 hours. And if I successfully complete the 2 hours, then I'm going to allow myself an hour of playing video games. What's the problem with this? You got to make it work. So if you have the incentive to do that, if you have the need to do that, then you can incorporate that into your study habits. Or you can say, okay, I'm going to spend 2 hours reading chapter 6 through 8. And if I complete that successfully, I'm going to go eat pizza because I love pizza. So this is a simplistic view of the Premack principle. Self-reward, and consequently having the reward as a reinforcement. Now, there's a hypothesis called a response deprivation hypothesis. And it simply says that a behavior can serve as a reinforcer when access to the behavior is restricted and its frequency falls or is in danger of falling below its preferred level of occurrence. So you apply that to the pizza eating or the video game, and the level of activity is what you're dealing with here. So imagine this rat that runs for an hour a day whenever it has free access to a running wheel. Now maybe it gets pleasure out of running, I don't know. And the 1 hour a day is the rat's preferred level of running. Your preferred level of study is 1 hour. If the rat is allowed to have free access to the wheel, but only for 15 minutes a day, it won't reach its preferred level. It'll be in a state of deprivation with regard to that running. That means that the rat that enters into this response deprivation business, this hypothesis. And now the rat would be willing to work, maybe pull a lever to have access to the wheel. So apply that to your situation, playing the video game, going to eat pizza, etc. It's very simple to do. We all have these wants and needs, and you can apply these principles to that. What's the difference between the Premack principle and the response deprivation hypothesis? The frequency is one. The frequency of behavior relative to a second behavior is the main difference. And the frequency of a single behavior and the I won't say danger, but the possibility of deprivation. So, can't get to the pizza or I can't get to the video game, run into a problem. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. It's a brief rundown of the Premack principle, and it gets complicated, starts out very simple, winds up being not so simple after all, but it's applicable. think about the pizza and think about the video game. Those are your desires. Okay, see you next time.